One of the biggest joys in life is to be able to contribute to somebody else's success and happiness. And this is the life of a consultant. Bertrand Meyer, who is a French academic, author and consultant in computer languages, I think probably articulates the role of consulting best. He says, the role of a trainer or a consultant or an extension specialist is to empower his customer, excuse the gender reference, this is a quote, and not make himself indispensable. I really like this because to me, being a consultant is genuinely about empowering your client. It's about empowering them to start making their own decisions so they decrease their reliance on you in any given topic at any given time. It doesn't mean you don't work with them over years and grow together, but it does mean that you build capacity to empower them to actually run their own businesses and ask their own questions. Before I go any further, today you're going to hear a number of stories, and I also just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners on which we meet, the Bindal and the Woolgarukaba people. I hope I've said that right. And acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, particularly, you know, as Sal mentioned with NAIDOC Week last week. So my name's Catherine Marriott and I'm currently the CEO of Riverine Plains, which is a farming systems group in the southern New South Wales and northern Victorian region. We are a not-for-profit member-based organisation. We've got about 660 odd members and we basically do anything that's going to build prosperity in our members down there. I have, however, spent a large chunk of my time as a consultant or leading organisations up in the northern beef industry, which is where my passion and my loyalty sit. If only my family would move up here, I would still be here in the region. So just a little bit about me before we go too far. I grew up in ag and I grew up on a farm, and I think growing up on a farm and in agriculture is one of the biggest gifts because it breeds resilience, it breeds fortitude, it enables you to try things, make mistakes and learn from them. I think one of the other things that it has given me is a real connection to country, and I think people that are not lucky enough to grow up into ag are constantly yearning for something such as that. I was a typical country kid. I used to ride my horse 10 k's to primary school up a dirt road in Bataguiney Primary School and leave it in the churchyard and then ride home the next day. You know, we were constantly trying things out. I'm one of four, and Mum had 4 of us in 4 years, and then our beautiful dad died, unfortunately, so poor old Mum got left with 4 kids and a farm to run. And I think, you know, we tried a lot of things, mostly her patience. You know, we used to do such stupid things as kids and learn about the consequences. So we found out that diesel is explosive. We found out petrol is even more so. And if you douse a shearing shed brush, and it was always the new ones, in petrol and then do a petrol line from the shearing shed brush to a piece of corrugated iron and you put bullets in the shearing shed brush and you lit it, they'll go off like an absolute shot, but you're safe because of the corrugated iron. Following school, I did a rural science degree, and as part of that, I won a scholarship to go and study in the States. And it was in the States that I really decided I wanted to be working in the animal nutrition space, and particularly the ruminant nutrition space. I was really passionate about people, and I was really passionate about animals and animal welfare. And I figured if I could actually feed animals a healthy diet, I would make healthier, happier cattle and healthier, happier people for eating the meat. And I'm also a big believer in having experiences from the ground up. And I think that's one of the most important things being a successful consultant or extension person, is that you understand things from the ground up. So when I finished my degree, I actually became a ringer. So with a 4-year science degree under my belt, I went and sat in the saddle for 12 months. And that was really, really important to get credibility, because I came from a sheep farm in Victoria and I wanted to work in the northern beef industry. So to be able to do that, I had no credibility. I was just this stupid little thing that, you know, grew up on a tiny little, you know, holding paddock, essentially. As Sal said, I've been very, very lucky also to work overseas. So I've spent quite a bit of time in Indonesia and the Philippines, and also have done work right throughout Southeast Asia, America and New Zealand. I think what this has given me is an amazing insight into the power and the need for behavioural flexibility and also communication. I've almost always played a role in an extension role or consulting role, or led an organisation where, hi Lee, where we're providing extension or advice services. So I'm by no means an expert, and I'm very, very conscious of the fact that I'm speaking to a room of experts, and there's not an awful lot that's more daunting than that. So today I'm hoping that I'm going to share with you, like some of the things that I'll share with you, you'll know, and that's great. But I hope I'm able to challenge some of you with some of your thinking, or at least get you to think a little bit differently, because otherwise why am I here? If I'm just here to tell you what you know, then there's no point. As I said earlier, it is such an amazing gift to be in the role that you all are, to be able to contribute to the success and happiness of people and the success of people's businesses is the most extraordinary gift. And I think it's a wonderful feeling that we probably all know and share. So today I'm going to share with you 4 key things that I think are really helpful in being a consultant. You definitely, obviously need a level of knowledge, skills, expertise to be able to do your job. Without that, you don't have any credibility whatsoever. However, I think that on top of these skills and expertise, you need to have 4 main things. One of them is communication and an understanding of the fact that people behave differently and need different things. The second thing is to be curious. The third thing is you need to be reliable and trustworthy. And the fourth one is self-reflection. And I'll talk a little bit more about all of those 4 things throughout this speech. So effective communication is the ability to ultimately influence others. It's about understanding what motivates different people. And being able to read between the lines, like what are they saying, what are they not saying, and then being able to ask really good questions. To be able to understand that not all people think the same, not all people act the same way, and not all people have the same experiences, even from within the same sector. The sooner that realisation kicks in and you can be flexible with your behaviour and your communication style, the sooner you're going to go from being a good consultant to being an extraordinary one. We all have typically a communication style that suits us. It doesn't take much energy, it's where we're really comfortable. It's who we are being with our mates. But if we are to create influence, that one communication style needs to be changed and you need to have flexibility. Because one communication style ultimately doesn't suit everybody. We're all put on the planet to be different, and that's what makes life interesting. So how do we go about creating influence? The first step is to be able to understand yourself. So what ticks you off? What gets you excited? What styles of communication do you like? And then if you can start to understand yourself, you've then got more capacity to be able to understand other people, because you'll start to notice differences. Connecting your clients with others that have different skill sets is also really important. So recognising your own speciality and recognising your areas of weakness is really pertinent to being a good consultant. I think, you know, and we've all done it, I've certainly done it, is try and help them with everything. It's absolutely impractical, and you're only going to get yourself in a pickle if you try. So reaching out to other experts is also part of being a really good consultant and recognising when that's important. Ultimately, what we like doing is, you know, fundamentally we like to be around people that are like us. It's just human nature. So, you know, what do I mean when I say that people are different? Well, there's different behavioural nuance and there's different experiential nuance. So from an experiential standpoint, I knew that I wanted to be working in the northern beef industry, but I needed to have experience, because coming from a sheep farm in Victoria to working in the northern beef industry was not going to lend me an awful lot of credibility. So I needed to, you know, have an experience which was similar. So then when I went out on stations, I could talk the language and actually be sort of more like the station managers that I'd be working with. If you have similar experiences with people, it's much easier to strike up a conversation. So, for example, if you like playing viola, you will be more comfortable hanging around with other musicians, you can talk the language, you've got similar experiences. Likewise, if you are a cyclist, you probably have been a little bit like me and for the last 2 weeks obsessed with the Tour de France. So it's easy to then strike up a conversation with people that have similar experiences to you. As ag consultants and extension specialists, you all have with your clients something in common. You have common experiences. You're all passionate about agriculture, you've got experience in agriculture. And that's a great start. But the behaviour piece is something that I don't think we stop and reflect on often enough. So from a behavioural perspective, an obvious example would be recognising whether or not you're working with introverts or extroverts. Extroverts are fairly outgoing, they're easy to get to know, they will speak rapidly, they're reasonably open, and the chances are if you're an extroverted style of person, hanging out with extroverts is easy. On the other hand, introverts, for example, enjoy their own space. They reflect on things, they're deep thinkers, and they like hanging out with people that are quieter. They can become overwhelmed by people that are a bit too exuberant. It's not that one is right or wrong, it's just something to think about, and it's interesting. Obviously, we have friends that are both, and I'm not saying that, if you're an extrovert, you hang out with only extroverts, and if you're an introvert, you hang out with introverts. I'm drawing the comparison between the two and asking you to think about how potentially you could behave differently around those as clients. If you can recognise certain things in certain people, then you can flex your behaviour, because as I said earlier, people like people that are like them. So they feel more comfortable if you are, of similar behavioural style. It's just human nature. Now, what I'm asking you to do is not to not be yourself. You will always have to be yourself. What I'm asking you to do is actually flex and think about who it is that you're working with. It's interesting, the whole authenticity piece, and so often we get told, oh, you need to be authentic, so I'm not changing my behaviour. But I think being authentic is actually around a value set. It's around what do you care about rather than an actual behaviour. And I've seen time and time again people becoming unstuck because they are an expert in something, so they don't need to flex their behaviour to talk to different people because this is who I am. I don't need to, I'm authentic, this is who I am. And it happens particularly when you take people from an expert, like operational level, and you put them into management. And they continue to be who they've been in operations, and it doesn't work. So it's actually a thing called the authenticity paradox, and if you're interested in it, there's a really good article in the Harvard Business Review, which is worth reading. So if you're wanting to be a successful consultant, you have to be flexible. I'm not asking you to change your values, quite the opposite. I'm asking you to change your behaviour so that your values actually stay intact. An example of this is when I was working over in Indonesia. So I was working in a largely Muslim country as a young female. I went over there when I was 26. Now I'm naturally reasonably outgoing. I speak quite quickly. I'm happy, bubbly, all the rest of it. Now, if I'd gone over to Indonesia and said, well, I don't care, you guys can all, cope with the fact that I speak really quickly, I'm outgoing and all the rest of it, I would have got nowhere. So what did I do? If I had been myself, I would have scared the pants off them. Actually, speaking of pants, I had quite a funny, and this is a communication story, I had quite a funny incident in Indo, and I jumped in a cab from Bandar Lampung airport out to a feedlot, and I said it was really hot and there was no aircon in the taxi, and I said to the taxi driver, "Maaf Pak, saya panas, bisakah Anda dibuka celana?" Now what I thought I was saying is, "Excuse me sir, I'm hot, can you please open the window?" Because there was no window opening thing. And this poor guy was literally like, I asked him about 3 times and nothing happened, and I was like, I do not know what I'm saying to this guy, but he is terrified because he was basically driving the car from the steering wheel, like he was on it basically. Anyway, I got to the feedlot and I said to the guys in the feedlot, I've just said this, and they all literally wet themselves. And I was like, oh dear God, what have I said? And I had said to the taxi driver 3 times, "Excuse me sir, I'm hot, can you please remove your pants?" So celana is window, jendela, similar, is pants, and dibuka, which is to open, or ironically to remove. So anyway, language is always very important. So instead, when I went to Indo, I spoke slowly, I used a quieter voice, and I wore long sleeves and pants in the horrifying heat, because to me that was actually about being respectful. Would I have done this home? Is that behaviour clinically me? No, I would have worn shorts and a t-shirt because that's what makes me comfortable. But the reality of it is that me being authentic is me being authentic to my values, and that was caring for my client and making sure that my client was comfortable. So with regards to the behaviour piece, there are a number of tools to demonstrate differences. I'm sure all of you have had experience with either Myers-Briggs, DISC, HBDI, there's colour ones. If you look up on the internet, they're there, there's hundreds of them. However, have you ever thought about the implications of these tools on how you actually become a better consultant? Often we do things like a behavioural or personality type tool, and that's cute, that was nice, but actually we miss out on the real power of those things, which is to continuously revisit them and to get a deeper understanding of the human condition. Like, how can we actually become a better person and a better consultant? One we spoke of earlier is introverts and extroverts. If you're dealing with an extroverted client, they're going to want to do a lot of talking. So let them. And if you're an introvert, you're going to want to constantly talk. Just pause and give them space to actually run. If you're dealing with an introverted client, you're going to need to give them more time to think. And don't try and fill that space. Be really conscious of the need to pause and silence and give them the time. As I said earlier, people like them, like people that are like them. So if you can mirror your client's behavioural preference, you're going to be trusted more. So why is this important to understand this? If you are dealing with a family or running a workshop, there'll be people who talk a lot and there'll be people that don't. So remember that it's really important to provide space for those that don't often speak up to do so, and don't judge them for it. I hear facilitators say, oh, that person up the back was bored or they were disengaged or whatever. Instead of judging them, actually get curious about that and be like, I wonder what they need to feel confident to speak up. For me, I do that in a number of ways. So if I am running a meeting, I will always send the agenda out a week before. Now, what that does is it gives the introverts time to actually think so that they feel confident contributing. Introverts think on the inside of their head, extroverts think on the outside of their head. So another thing that I do is if I'm in a meeting and I have a question, I'll ask the question and then I'll say, I'm just going to give everybody a couple of minutes to think. You drive the extroverts mad because they'll want to think, they'll be wanting to talk to think, but the reality of it is once you open the conversation, they can do their thinking on the run. But what it does do is give the introverts time to actually get their thoughts together and be able to contribute, because if you don't allow space for everyone to contribute, you're missing out on half of the input that you could get. Another thing that I do is I'll go around the room and make sure that everybody has had an opportunity to speak. We miss out on a real lot if we don't create a space for people who are less likely to speak up to indeed do so. Another thing that we need to be aware of is that people will think in different ways. So you've got people that are big picture, long-term view style people, and then you've got people that are much more likely to want data here and now. They'll trust, much more detail-focused things. So if you give too much information and detail to a big picture person, they will struggle, and they can do it, but it'll take them a lot more energy. Likewise, if you've got a detail-focused person and you're constantly talking about vision and where we're all going, they're going to think that you're airy-fairy. So it's really important to understand and acknowledge the differences. Oh, that was a bit rude. Sorry. The differences in your clients and what their preference is. So how do you do that? Like, how do you figure out whether somebody is a detail-focused person or somebody who's going to be much more inspired by a vision? You do it by listening to people and listening to the language that they use. So, for example, someone might say something like, where are we going with all of this? Yeah, but where's this going to land us in 5 years? How is this actually going to help us? They might start to pitch some scenarios to you. They will get excited about talking about the future and where they might end up. You'll then start to think, okay, so when I'm communicating with this person, if I overwhelm them with data, it's going to be challenging for them. They're not going to be comfortable. And as a consultant, yeah, sure, your job is to push people out of their comfort zone, but it's also to bring them on a journey with you. The same thing is if you've got someone who's really detail focused, they will ask things like, yeah, but where's the cash coming from? How are we going to actually get there? Do we have any data? What skills have we got to be able to do it? So these people are much more focused on the here and now, and we absolutely need both of them. The trick is to give people the types of information that's going to make them most comfortable and most engaged with what you're actually saying. The details piece will be harder for the big picture people, and the visionary big picture people, big picture stuff will frustrate the details focused people. So as a consultant, it's really important that you understand that there is a difference and that you are able to provide information in a way that helps them feel most comfortable. I've met a few people who work seamlessly between those two, and one of them's in the room. He's frustrating and I love him, and it's Cam Nicholson. And he seems to be able to do the big picture and the detail seamlessly, which is awesome. It's really important that you celebrate both styles of people, because the big picture people are going to create change. They're going to be the ones that drive the business in a different direction and challenge things. The detail people are going to make it happen. So an example is my sister and I. I'm quite a big picture thinker. Hannah is a very detail focused picture person. So I went over to the States. Hannah is running the sheep feedlot at home. I come home from the States and I'm like, Hannah, I've just been talking to Joel Salatin. I think we need to put chickens in the feedlot. That'd be great. They can clean up all the grain. You know, big picture. Hannah goes, oh, that's great, Missy. That's amazing. Where are we going to get the chickens from? What's the genetics? Where are we going to get them killed? What's their feed to gain ratio? What's the cash flow budget look like? And I was like, oh, we don't why do we need to worry about all that? Of course, we do need to worry about that, right? But it goes to show you need both styles of people. One is going to help grow the business and take things further and challenge. The other one is going to make sure that the ship stays on the rails. So the next part of my speech is around being curious and the power of being curious. Peter Drucker, who is an Austrian-American management consultant, education and author, who was known to be the founding father of modern business management, said, "My greatest strength as a consultant is to be ignorant and ask a few questions." Now, I absolutely love this saying because it highlights to me the difference between being a consultant and being an extraordinary consultant. It's the capacity to ask questions. Remember, you don't yet know what they want. You only think you know what they need. One of the biggest mistakes that I made early on as a consultant was to naively assume I had all the answers. Well, I had to, didn't I? That's what they were paying me for. Another assumption that I made is that I thought I knew what the problem was. I went in with a preconceived idea of how I was going to fix everything. With my arrogance and narrow view of the world, I preconceived it being a financial problem or a production problem or a business planning problem. And it may be that, but it also might be something completely different. And that's the power of the curious mindset. You can help people sometimes with things that they don't even realise they needed help with. By the time I got to Indo, I had done some learning. Now, I spent the first 6 months being in Indo asking questions. And then one day, one of the farmers asked me a question. And I went, we are now ready to try and implement some change. But if I hadn't been curious and learnt about that industry, I knew nothing about the Indonesian feedlot industry. Yeah, sure, I could feed cattle and put weight on, and I knew, the biochemistry of the inside of a beast. But I had no idea about how the feedstuffs over there would interact or, the feeding regime or anything else. So it's really, really important to be curious. So I went over there as a cattle nutritionist, but after asking questions around feeding practice, timing of feeding, bunks, bunk cleaning, I soon realised that there was much more to it. And I actually first started working on feedlot management with them. So managing the timing of feeds, bunk cleaning, hospital pens, giving water to the livestock. Without that, it wouldn't have mattered what fancy ration I pulled together for them. The actual fundamentals of the feedlots weren't as efficient as they could be, so it wouldn't have mattered. There was far bigger holes in the bucket to fill. I then ended up doing animal handling schools because these guys are used to cattle that they lead and tie up in or just outside their house, and all of a sudden they've got ranging Brahmins from Australia. So people were getting hurt, livestock were getting hurt, and the animals were really stressed. Well, you all know stock won't put on weight if they're stressed. So I had to actually flex again after my curiosity, and I started running animal handling schools with them all. Some very funny incidents doing that. Anyway, it was only then that I started to get to the nutrition side of things. So by being curious and not being arrogant and assuming that I had all the answers and this is what they needed to do, I was able to actually be helpful, which is, fundamentally what it's all about. We then moved into implementing breeding programs, and I knew nothing. Absolutely nothing about breeding cattle in feedlots in the tropics. And so what we did is together we learnt. I didn't have all the answers, I told them that. But they were okay with it. And together we tried different things, we monitored things, we collected data, and we learned together. They'd come up with an idea, we'd try it. I'd come up with an idea, we'd try it. We'd compare things. But we actually learnt together. And yet I was a consultant, expected to have all of the answers. And that was when I learned, actually, you don't need to. You need to be able to ask the right questions. It's important as a consultant to leave your ego at the door sometimes. I guess one of my major mentors was the late David Hanlon, and he was the man that instilled in me a curiosity that I will forever be grateful for. I don't know if... Does anyone in the room know David? Surely heaps of people would have, yeah. He's the most extraordinary man. And I would ring him frustrated or cranky with something, and he'd say to me, Catherine, you are coming from this, you're coming at this as if you are right and they are wrong. No wonder you're angry. Have you asked why they're behaving like that or why that situation has come about? And it always got me, and it always worked. You decreasing my frustration. You can't just come at it by asking questions. You have got to be genuinely curious, because if you're genuinely curious, you can't get upset or angry because you're not pushing for an agenda. You have a learning mindset if you're really genuinely curious, and you start to find things fascinating. He'd say to me, I'd ring him back and give him the outcome of whatever I'd been ranting about, and he'd be like, isn't that fascinating? And I think if we can look at the world being curious and finding things fascinating, we're actually going to be much more helpful to our clients. So being curious does a couple of things. One, it builds trust, because people like talking about their business, and if you can listen to them, they will love you even more, because people do like talking about themselves. The other thing that it does is you can ask clarifying questions. Now, this makes sure that you actually understand what they have said and not what you think they have said. Something else to be aware of in businesses as consulting is, and it's really important, that you acknowledge what's working in a business and that not all businesses are broken. Recently, I had a mate on a cattle station get a horse breaker and cattle train, you know, he's tailing weaners and whatnot, and he was training cattle and ringers, and he was there for a month. Now, he is an extraordinary guy. He is an absolute expert. There's no one that breaks horses or works cattle better than this bloke. But he came into the station and never once asked a question. He just purported to tell them everything that they were doing wrong. Now, this guy is phenomenal. He will never be asked back, because he didn't ask a question. He just purported to assume that he knew what they were doing, and he paid no credibility to, you know, the value that these guys had derived. Now, this station is a particularly well-run station. So there's a lot of power in building relationships, in asking questions. We have a really diverse industry full of people that think differently, do things differently, and this can be irritating and frustrating when they ask really stupid questions. But maybe that stupid question is going to be the next best thing in ag. Remember, no big step changes have ever happened from people thinking the same way. Do you think we would have ended up with a car if Henry Ford had focused on breeding a faster, stronger horse? No, he asked questions. I've had this experience in my current role. As I said earlier, I've spent my entire career in the northern beef industry. I'm now running a farming systems group, which in the past has only ever done grains or soils research. I was very clear in the interview that I was not a grains expert, and if they wanted a grains expert, I'm not your CEO. My first 6 months in the role was a really steep learning curve. I asked lots of questions. I went out to farmers' places, I drove around their farms, and I could have been embarrassed about the fact that I was heading up their organisation and I should know all about their businesses. The relationship I built during my curious phase, and PS, I'm still in it, has landed me with the most beautiful people and also some really interesting knowledge. So I was able to ask questions, and one of the questions that I asked, and keeping in mind, like I've got, and we'll have people from outside the beef industry that ask us questions. Pause and don't think of them stupid straight away. Go, I wonder why we actually do it like that. Because what happened was we were doing soil tests across the region, and we were testing the sort of top 5 to 10 centimetres of soil. And my question was, why do we only test the top 5 to 10 centimetres of soil when the plant soil, the roots, go down to up to a metre? Like, why wouldn't we test the entire soil profile? Now, there was a few people starting to do that, but what that yielded was we have a subsoil acidity issue, and then below that we have a sedicity issue. Now, what happens if you've got a subsoil acidity issue is that particularly pulses, there's something chemical that happens in the soil, and aluminium becomes a free something or other, and it burns the roots. So you're fundamentally inhibiting your capacity to grow a decent yield in your pulse crops. Now, I had asked a question completely naively, but because we're so used to doing what we always do, we think the same way, and we often miss opportunities like that. So if somebody comes to you with a curious question, consider it and have a think about what it is that they're asking. There is so much power in being curious, and there's a skill in asking questions that are going to lead to you being a much better consultant. So trust is the next thing. Trust is about being reliable. There's a huge piece of being a trusted and respected consultant or an extension officer. To do as you say is massively important. If you say you're going to do something by a certain time, if you say you're going to follow up, if you say you're going to ring, please do it. Interestingly, I looked up reliability and trust on the internet, and the first article that came up was about magicians. And I was like, oh, wow. But then I read the article and it said that magicians are some of the most reliable people on the planet. They tell you they're going to deceive you, and then they deceive you. So they've done exactly what they said they were going to do. Now, it's probably not the best example, but it shows to you the importance and the strength in doing what you say you are going to do and follow up. It builds trust. Nothing irritates a client more or a group of people more than when you're at a workshop, somebody asks a question and you're like, yeah, I'll send that article, and then you don't. To you, it was an off-the-hand kind of a comment, but to them, that was something that could fundamentally underpin or unlock a blockage in their business. So another piece about building trust, as we've mentioned, is to be curious and ask questions, but genuinely listen to their answers. The last piece, and probably the most important piece, if you're going to be on a journey of continuous improvement, is self-reflection. How many of you guys actually ever stop for 10 minutes after you've done something and go, how could I have done that better? Or what worked and what didn't? And then pause, reflect, and change your behaviour to try something different. How many of you guys do that? Yeah, not many. Good on you for being honest, because I don't do it often enough. But when I do, it's interesting when you give yourself time and space to actually think about how I could improve, the step changes that you can make in your own self as a consultant and as a leader for industry. So in summary, be aware of your behavioural style and your preferences, because people are different. They feel safe with different communication styles and behaviours. And if you can make yourself more like your client from a values perspective to help them get the most out of your interaction, you will be a much more efficient and effective consultant. Be curious. We weren't put on the planet to have all the answers. And as a consultant, you don't need to. That's a misnomer that your ego tells you. Be curious, ask questions. Sure, you need a certain level of skills and experience, but to be able to ask questions and work genuinely with your client means that you've got a much more long-standing relationship and a heightened capacity to grow their business with them. Be trustworthy and say what you're going to, and do what you're going to say, and reflect. Modify your behaviour, try something else, reflect again. That's how you get constant improvement. So if you can manage all of that, you'll find yourself with an endlessly satisfying career, and you'll continue to be rewarded with increasingly happy, successful clients, and that not only help them, but give you warm and fuzzy feelings as well. Thank you.